Hey folks, Steve here with a monitor side chat video for you, being recorded on August 22nd, 2021. This being the sort of usual monthly check-in video. So I'm going to be covering the month of August and a few things going on in the background. A lot of different topics to cover today, so I suspect this video is going to be on the longer side as usual. This video will work pretty good for audio only if you want to have this playing in the background while you're doing something else. I do plan on showing a few things in the background to sort of have up while I talk to it, including some maps of various games. So, depending on your familiarity with those games, if you're on audio only, you may be a little bit held back on that in terms of enjoyment, but should be all well and good. So for this video, we're going to go through the typical stuff. We're going to talk through some of the publisher updates. I'm going to talk about a few things that are going on game-wise that have not shown up in the video series I've been running lately, to kind of talk through some of those things. And then we'll get into some other special topics. So we'll go through a lot of the fun topics to start, and then the less fun topic will be at the end, and I will give you fair warning when we get there. So, let's get through some of the monthly updates from the primary publishers that I track, which are GMT Games and Compass. Those just tend to be the publishers that I buy the most games from. And we'll take a look at the monthly update. They actually published theirs a couple days earlier than I thought. I thought they were going to publish this on the 22nd, but I think this went up on the 20th, so have had plenty of time to look at it yourselves. But we'll kind of talk through what they've got up for us. Now, GMT has had their summer sale going on. I will just say straight up, I could basically buy any game I could theoretically want with half off because I've had so many P500s in the last year with GMT. But at the moment, I'm sort of, I've got like a first world problem. I have every GMT game that I really want right now that is purchasable. I've either P500'd it, already, and I got it on pre-order, and there's really nothing left in sort of their in-stock back catalog that I'm willing to purchase at this point. It's not like I'm I'm not purging my game collection, but I'm certainly starting to run out of coherent shelf space. So I need to be a little pickier about what games I go out and get. And there was really nothing left. I have so many of their games, right? But this is still something that is appreciated every year, right? That they do this. You can get a lot of great games, and for me, I just ended up not doing so. I guess what I could have done, I could have been a scalper, and I could have purchased some games that were low on stock and then flip them or something. But that seems bizarre and a thing not nice to do. So passed on that option. Though I'm sure there's somebody out there who's trying to do that. Going through here, looks like somebody had they had an issue with some quantity in stock error on their site, so maybe a few folks ordered a game they thought they could get, but were not able to, or vice versa. They kind of talk through their supply chain shipping slowdowns with the global logistics challenges that the world is facing. Now that we're 18 months into a pandemic, not fun. But some of the new stuff they are throwing out there, so the new P500s, not as many this update. And really, I'll say just straight up that this monthly update from GMT, there's not as much exciting stuff for me to talk about. There's plenty of stuff here to look at, but not a lot of exciting new things to process in terms of my interest. But they do have a new 1800 train game for India, and then a lunchtime game for the Munich crisis in Czechoslovakia, which they're going to go more detail on here. They've got some sneak peeks of a few different things. Great battles of the American Civil War Shiloh game. I don't have much to say on that. I'm not really familiar with that series. I haven't played it. Not that I, you know, not that I wouldn't. I just it's just not a series I've spent much time on. They've got some updates for the GMT1 initiative, so some play testing is going on. They're making progress with a few games. Nothing that immediately jumps out is like really great news for me, just in terms of the games that I own. But if you like Fields of Fire, if you have Flashpoint South China Sea in mind, then there's some good stuff coming for that. And they still have, I guess, some playtesters wanted for the Bell of Treason. So I guess there's some places to sign up for playtests if that interests you. As I had been going through here, really to me, the big items of concern, we're seeing where their production schedule is at. So you can see, all of their new stuff. Talked a lot about the other stuff last month. This was that train game. There's the Bell of Treason. So for me, I really do not play the 1800 train games. That's just not a game for me. Just not my thing. I don't think anyone who likes these games are bad people. It's just not a thing for me. Not my thing. This game, the Bell of Treason, is maybe a little more interesting, but I have not played Fort Sumter. I have not played Red Flag Over Paris, which are part of these Crisis series games, and I didn't get Fort Sumter because the subject matter just... it's interesting, but I just didn't know that I wanted a game on it. Same thing with Red Flag Over Paris, kind of an interesting historical topic, but I don't know that I really wanted to game that out, what game there is to enjoy. And I kind of feel the same way with Bell of Treason, where I just don't know what to expect. Maybe I need to buckle down and just play one of these games and see how it plays, but it's very, it's more Euro-like than a war game, so I'm not quite as interested in it, even if the topics are, unique and interesting perspectives in terms of making into a game. I just haven't brought myself to play it. The other weird thing was, like, Fort Sumter has a 3-inch box. I don't know that that's warranted, but gosh, that takes up a lot of shelf space for what is a small game. So... there's that, and with the P500s on the horizon, a strategy game set in the Bronx, I have no idea what that could be. If it's in the Bronx, like what are we, like a Gangs of New York thing? Like, I don't know I have no idea what this could be at all. No clue. And there may be something staring me in the face in terms of historical context that I should be aware of, but I'm blanking on it. A new game using the Sekigahara system, so it sounds like if it's a new game in that system, it's probably not based in Japan. It's probably another conflict, but will use the same block and card system. And this is, I'm ashamed to admit I don't have Sekigahara. That is one, while I understand it is well thought of, I've just not gotten around to it. I hear it's good. So knowing there's another game in the system, that's cool to know. But kind of hard to predict what it could be. A War of the Roses game. Now, War of the Roses is an interesting conflict, and and I've mentioned this on the channel before, I'm not a huge block game guy, like Columbia Games, Worthington Games, the games with the blocks and the 4 step losses and all that. Not a huge fan of that, but I did like, Richard III? That was okay. I liked that. That was enjoyable for what it was. But it's interesting to wonder, like, well, what could this be? Is it in a game system we're familiar with? Is it something new? It is an interesting topic, for sure. So, interested to see what comes out of that. Fast-playing game set during the Cold War. That could be anything. That could be another slice of Twilight Struggle. It could be any number of things. And fast playing is going to mean it's either probably Euro-based or very light complexity, which is okay. That's fine. But I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. And then, something new for the Coin Series. Again, that could be anything. And by something new, it's either a new game or maybe a game with a whole new mechanic tied to the Coin Series. That might be interesting if it's a total revamp. but we know we got the British Way coming, which is sort of that like that collection of 4 mini coin games all in one package that I think is kind of an interesting topic. So, we'll see. There's a lot. What's weird to think about is that GMT has a lot in the queue right now. They have a lot of stuff that's in the middle of being produced. Um, but they have so much on the way and so much that are P500s on the horizon that it's like, man, there's a lot of games, right? We still don't know much more about that Napoleonic era Ted Racer game, and tons of other stuff of interest that just hasn't shown up yet. They cover Weekend at the Warehouse. I've never gone. I'm not sure that I will ever get to really do that, but it looks like people are having fun there. And then, really, I would skip past some of this stuff. There's nothing, to my mind, super interesting. This is run-of-the-mill type of stuff, looking at various updates. What I do like is, they have the production outlook, and then further below they're going to have some preview stuff, which is cool. So I think the big thing for the production outlook right now is that what's going to be shipping here soon is Absolute War. I have a lot of East Front games at this point. I'm not sure that's up my alley. I have MBT, the first printing, and I've not properly played it. And in fact, it's the same sort of story with Panzer. I have Panzer in the first few expansions, but they're largely unplayed, unfortunately. They are games that I don't feel very comfortable solitaring, because I think a lot of the dynamic of that game is the opposition and having sort of the hidden aspects to it, or the way you do the combat interaction. And so I have them because of thinking I would get to play them, and I have a buddy of mine who would probably play it with me, but we just never gotten to it. And I was thinking about selling my Panzer and MBT games, but now with the new printings, I probably, I wouldn't get much money back probably for selling them. So it's sort of this weird thing, like a sunk cost. Do I hold on to them and maybe still play them? I don't know. But the second printings are all coming out, or third printing for the main game, and that's good for the folks who've been interested in it. Almoravid is interesting, but I've still not played Nevsky, so it's hard for me to say anything more about that. Conquest and Consequence I am interested in getting. We talked a little bit about that last month. That is on my list. I look forward to getting that. It's at the printer, which means, it could ship maybe this year, but maybe next year, just depending on what all this logistical stuff plays out to be. If you like Mark Simonich's games, the Salerno 43 will be coming soon. I do not have any of these games that Mark has designed, not because I don't think I would enjoy, I think I would enjoy them, for sure. It's just a lot of these games fill niches that I'm already filling with other games, whether it's a Dark and Deadly series game or now OCS or something else. It isn't lining up where I feel the need to break into the series. And if I did, I would feel like I would want to get them all, right? So get Salerno 43, get Normandy 44, but I'm just not. I don't think that it's going to be up my alley at this point. I'm kind of venturing down different paths. I can't buy everything. That's the reality. For me, the really big things of note are the stuff going to the printer in August, but I'll say, there's so many things at the printer that just because these things are going to the printer in August doesn't mean we're going to see them anytime soon. I'm a little pessimistic about how soon we'll see these things. The big ones for me are Pacific War. Very much looking forward to that. I have the old 80s edition that I bought from someone, and I've been tempted to bust that out and try to mess around with it, but I'm just waiting for the new game. Looking forward to it. I should point out, and I'll put this in the link in the description, Mark Herman has a YouTube channel, and he has been producing a bunch of videos covering Pacific War using it's not with a prototype of, it's with a prototype of the game using the graphics that will be published, but it's not a early copy of the game. I hope that makes sense. I'm probably not describing that right. But if you're familiar or you're interested in Pacific War and you want to kind of see some of that stuff, go to Mark Herman's YouTube channel. You can probably find it just by searching for Mark Herman in the YouTube search, and you will find his channel. You should be able to find his channel and see the videos he's doing on the Pacific War. They're kind of interesting there. The U.S. Civil War second printing. So I have the first printing. I have played it a number of times. I actually really like it. I haven't decided if I like For the People or U.S. Civil War more, but I like both games a lot. And you guys have never seen me talk about this game on the channel because I've played it opposed with a buddy of mine, and the same buddy I've played For the People with. And I did that long before this channel really got any momentum behind it, so I've never really shown it on camera. I've never really talked about it, but I do like it, and maybe at some point I will. The important thing about the second printing is that there is a update kit being released for it, which really updates the rulebook, some player aid cards, and I think that's it. I want to say that it might be like one other thing I'm not remembering. And so me and my buddy have held off on playing this again until the update kit comes out, and we have update kits for both of our copies, so no matter if I go to his place or he comes to my place, we can play it with the latest and greatest stuff. And based on the stuff I've seen on the forums, the updates for the second printing, for the new rules, are going to make the game better and just will be an improvement overall for everything with the game. So if you skipped out on the U.S. Civil War before, now would be a great time to get the second printing. If you've got the first printing, you might want to look at getting the update kit. The one bummer is they had released a update kit a year or two ago for the first printing. So if you're really trying to keep score, the U.S. Civil War is on like a 1.3 version of the rules, and I had bought a update kit from a couple years ago, and now I'm buying another update kit, and you say, Steve, that seems silly. Why do you have to do that? Because the game's that good, honestly. I really like it. I think it does a very good job. There's some things I don't necessarily like, which has to do with the way the leaders come in and leave and that sort of thing. But otherwise, the game's really good. So for me, I don't mind spending $10 to get some revised materials that make this game even better. I'm totally behind it. So my expectation is that when the second printing happens and it's at the printer in August and it gets delivered back, that the update kits will be sent out and I'll be able to play that game. And maybe at that point, I could show it on camera and do some stuff, or at least maybe do a session report video on what me and my buddy get into playing it. We are planning on playing it sometime in the near future. So something very interesting to look forward to. The stuff that is not quite ready to go to print, so some months away there's a lot of stuff here. The things of interest to me, Fall of Saigon, which is a Fire in the Lake expansion. I'm looking forward to that. Fire in the Lake is my favorite coin game. So I'm looking forward to having that on the shelf with the game itself. And then you can see there's some other high-profile stuff. The Russian campaign reprint, another Paths of Glory Deluxe. I mean, how many times have Paths of Glory been reprinted? a lot. And then you have the Vietnam GMT edition. I am still very much looking forward to that. I did see that they uploaded to the GMT website some additional files for some of the player aid charts and stuff, so you can sort of get a preview of that and check that out. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know how I'll get to play this game. It seems like it's a big, long game that take a long time to play, and it doesn't do well solo apparently, so it's going to be real hard to figure out how we play that if I do it solo on camera, but I'm willing to try, just because it's just a cool game. I'm looking forward to it. Now everything else here is far enough away, I don't really want to comment on it. The CDG solo system is going to be cool. China's War, Clash of Sovereigns, these are games that I'm interested in. I did pre-order Clash of Sovereigns, and then there's just a whole lot of stuff out there still. Pursuit of Glory reprint, I'm going to get in on that because I missed the first Pursuit of Glory print. Musket and Pike Dual Pack I'm interested in. Next War Supplement 3 I am interested in. A lot of stuff still to come. I mean, there's so many games GMT is producing right now. Just so many to look forward to. Crazy stuff. The project updates and sample art. So if you're interested in Mr. President, they posted some good stuff in here. Box cover for that slice of Twilight Struggle, Red Sea conflict, and the Horn of Africa. Here's the stuff that I'm really interested and glad to see, which is the near final art for Tanto Monta, The Rise of Ferdinand and Isabella. This is a... Well, I don't know if the series has a name, but there's Here I Stand, Virgin Queen, and now Tanto Monta, which is the third game in that sort of overall series of these multiplayer, card-driven games set in Europe. So they put some sample cards. If you're familiar with Here I Stand or Virgin Queen, these cards look very much like the cards from those games. And if you were to try to read the card text and make sense of what these things are, advance the loyalty of one noble something by one level, add 2 regular. So you can sort of try to figure out what kind of mechanics are going to be in the game. Who knows? There's probably a lot still to see get developed here. They've got some counter art. You can see that there is actually an effort to make differentiation. So there's whatever that is, and I am not going to be able to even properly guess what that is. You've got your man-at-arms. You've got a knight on a horse. A cannon, so there's maybe different unit types. There might be a lot of information available in this game that I've not totally uncovered, but maybe I'm behind the times. I think the really interesting thing is see the sample game map. And you can see right away the focus, right? It's about Ferdinand and Isabella, so ultimately you can see there's Spain taking up a good chunk of the map. You have Portugal, you have... let's see. It wasn't the country Spain didn't exist yet. It was... I'm trying to think. What, oh gosh, my mind is... Castile and... Aragon. Castile and Aragon, I think, were the principal kingdoms here prior to them uniting under one crown of Spain. And then I suspect this is still the Muslim remnants in the area and North Africa as well. You see France is on the board. There's a lot of interesting bits here to try to parse, and I don't think I'm going to be able to make any real good projections here, but certainly if you're familiar with Here I Stand or Virgin Queen, they're great games, by the way. This just provides yet another twist on that system. You can see there's some inset maps that cover more of the global positionings for the empires and countries involved. There's the Canary Islands inset map, so getting into those islands and colonizing them, I suspect, is one game aspect. Again, some of that's guessing, but very cool to see. Looking forward to that. There's your box cover for Salerno 43. Looks quite interesting and cool. Very what is like an active painting, right, or drawing, or however this was generated. Very active. You got stuff exploding, tanks firing. Just an interesting, dynamic picture. And then sample counters, some more stuff for the horror game that's being produced, which is kind of interesting. Not sure how this is going to go, but and more stuff there. So overall, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here to look at from a GMT perspective. They are producing like crazy. They have a lot of things going on. Even if you're not immediately interested in everything that they produce, I think it is hard to deny that they're producing a lot of stuff, a lot of war game content being provided, a lot of non-war game content being provided. So it doesn't matter, I guess, what your flavor is, if you like both or you only like one or the other. I mean, there's just a lot coming from that space. So that does it for GMT. For me, it's a lot of wait. I have a lot of games. I don't need. I'm like reaching a point where I don't need to be purchasing every game that gets produced. Obviously, so for me, it's like I'm just waiting for the good ones. I'm waiting for the ones that really interest me, and I have the patience for that. Switching over to Compass, not a lot of new stuff from last month to this month. They did add this Red Eclipse game, which is sort of a, as best as I can tell, it's a Cold War tactics game, where you'll have individual soldier or squads, I think, and armor, mechanized forces, and air all together. There's some card-driven aspects to it. Not something I'm immediately interested in. Really, there's not for me. I'm still waiting for No Peace Without Honor. I'm pretty sure I did pre-order this, so I'm interested to get that. But most other stuff hasn't really blown up in my radar, other than the stuff that I've already had pre-ordered for a long time. And so let's see if I can quickly pull some of these guys up. Um, I am kind of interested in this, but War for America, the American Revolution. But I've got other American Revolution games. I still really like Washington's War, and I know there's some opinions out there that like Washington's War is a very simple game. That's the beauty of Washington's War. It's a simple game. It's easy to get to the table. It plays quick. It does everything it needs to do. I do wish there was like an advanced Washington's War, like advanced D&D to D&D. Like I want an advanced version of that, but I'm okay with it being what it is. I do have more complicated American Revolution games from Compass, even End of Empire, which I think you can still get. That's a very cool game, but how this compares, I mean, who knows? There's some other stuff out here. Roma Victrix was actually one that I was kind of looking at. I was thinking through maybe to pick that up as another Ancients game. Blue Water Navy, as well as the South. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. There's a couple of games that have been of interest to me, but I just have not been able to pull the trigger on. Um, Barbarians at the Gates, that's another one that I was considering. They have a lot of Ancients games kind of in flux right now that are coming. If you look past what's on the front page of Compass, you can see there's a lot of different things that are out there that are interesting. Here we go. So I am waiting for Schutztruppe. This is being a World War One East Africa game, which I'm just totally. And this is a reprint of a game that was I can't remember if it was a magazine game before. I'd have to go look it up. Here's the map. You can see so it's German East Africa, and you're fighting that campaign. And I just think it's a topic that doesn't get covered as much, I think, and so I'm very interested in seeing how this plays out. It looks like they got a mounted map for this one, just 2 counter sheets. I don't know. I'm looking forward to this when the time comes, when they can get this published. It's not there yet. And then obviously, the other big game of concern for me is the Third World War reprint. This being their big, super deluxe reprint of the 4 games from that series from back in the day by Frank Chadwick. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Waiting to see. I was hoping it was going to come out this year, and it is sounding a lot like it will not be this year. That's what it sounds like. I guess we should be expecting next year. Just based on all that information. And there's not... I thought we had some pictures. Maybe they previewed Third World War somewhere on one of the streams. But still waiting on this one to get finalized. And then, let's see, was there anything else? No. I mean, there's... Again, depending on your interest, there's a lot of games out for Compass still to come. They have been on a roll lately of getting games added added to the pre-order list, but in terms of the upcoming titles, it's going to still be a while before I immediately jump on something. And I know folks are going to say, Steve, what about some of these World War I games that are coming out? Well, this one is a card-driven game with point-to-point movement. I already have Paths of Glory, so I don't know how interested I am in this. And I still have Balance of Powers from Compass Games covering World War One that I've not played yet, that being on my shelf of shame, if you watch that video from a little ways back. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of good stuff coming out. It just comes into what's your interest. The Enemy Action series is getting more games coming out for it. So if you like Enemy Action Ardennes, Enemy Action Kharkov, I think, is another one. All of those are, they're operational games. World War II. They compete with Dark and Deadly. They compete with Mark Simonich's series. I have not played them, so it's hard for me to comment from there. Okay, so I think that's 30 minutes of publisher updates and various statuses of things to look forward to. I think I'm going to go ahead and switch gears. I want to give you guys a little bit of a fun update. This is stuff that didn't come up on the channel. I just did not really have a way to do it easily. I can probably put some of this information into a session report post on the Consim World page, but I have to get logged into that system. I haven't logged in a very long time. I managed to address my top one Shelf of Shame game issue, and that I had never played Wilderness War, and it's a game that I have had for a number of years now. And over the last couple of weeks, my wife and I got to playing Wilderness War for the first time. We played one game so far, and we played the tournament scenario, the Anna Mirabilis scenario, which covers, I think it's 57 to 59, I want to say. So it's the shortest scenario, but it is one that is, I guess, the most balanced, so we just played that to try it out. And we had a good time with it. I liked it, and it was sort of one of these things, like I figured I would, but it sat on my shelf unplayed for years, and I've just felt terrible about that, and I rectified that. I said, okay, we're gonna do it. We're gonna have our kid put to sleep, and then we're gonna play long into the night, and it did. It took us, we were playing for multiple hours into past midnight, but we played it. And I mean that. So I think this must still be in stock. So if you're interested in Wilderness War, you can pick it up. I know that Bayonets and Tomahawks has come out, which is another game covering the same conflict from GMT. I probably am not going to get that game because I have this game, and I like the French and Indian War as a topic a lot. I have a lot of different ways that I explore the topic because I have books, I have PC games. That's something someday I should talk more about on the channel, maybe. We'll see. But we got to playing this, finally, and I can kind of give you guys an abbreviated session report on it. So we played, and the way we did it, and this happens to be the 1757 setup in Vassal. Some user, Theeny, uploaded this to Board Game Geek, so I'm going to use it to talk to, because this is what the scenario starts up as if you're playing that given scenario, which is, again, 1757 through 1759. You can see it ends up being 6 turns, and so 6 hands of cards. It is a card-driven game, point-to-point movement, the whole thing. You have an early season turn, and then you have a late season turn, and then you have winter, and then you start a new year in the early season. So the way we decided to set it up was I knew that the British were going to get, over time, just a lot more reinforcements than the French, so I had me play the French, my wife played the British. And this is the setup, so you can see when it comes to this war, if you're not already familiar, there's really 3 sort of paths through here. If you're the British, you basically want to take this whole region up here, right? That's sort of what you need to do. And you have a couple different ways to get there. One, which is the contested but quick path, is through the Lake Champlain area. There's this sort of, way out in the wilderness track to get to Ohio Forks, Fort Duquesne, which would eventually be Fort Pitt, and then be where Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is today. Traced up here to Lake Erie, and then using this as your, sort of water highway to get up through here, take Fort Niagara, and being pressuring Montreal from the west. And then there's the way out east, where the British are moving via naval invasion from Halifax to Louisbourg to eventually the mouth of the St. Lawrence River to Quebec. And that, knowing all of that, it was sort of, okay, we're going to play through and let's just see what happens. This topic is especially interesting to me, and in fact, the map is especially interesting to me because I am sorry, I just got a ping somewhere on my computer. Someone trying to message me. Over down here is where I'm originally from. I am originally from Pennsylvania, and so I'm familiar with the terrain out this way. And in fact, like what is on this map as Laurel Ridge, Allegheny, Central, Ohio Forks, those are areas that I'm very familiar with. And so it's just a special part of the fun to be thinking about these areas that I'm familiar with, but in the context of, no, but it's the 1700s and it's the wilderness. Trying to march an army through the woods to get to Ohio Forks. Just very interesting to think through all of that. But the way that the game sort of played out was that, we looking at the game situation, you can see there's a lot of stuff around this, from Albany through where Ticonderoga is and Crown Point. So that's really where, this is a big major theater. But we ended up, my wife and I, playing cards that really focused on other parts of the map, because it was like, we're just going to get into a big slugging match there. Maybe we're going to try, we're each thinking we're going to try to outmaneuver each other. And so my wife focused on getting troops moved to Halifax. So she moved some of Abercrombie's army immediately to Halifax, just right away. First card play or two, within the first couple card plays, she had the New York army moved to Halifax, and then was beginning to work on Louisbourg. And so eventually, though I had played some cards that made the siege of Louisbourg hard, it got to the point where she had enough siege progress that she could play this surrender card that basically meant she would take the fort of Louisbourg, but my army would get to leave with honors, and I relocated them to Quebec. So it was crappy because she got Louisbourg sooner than I wanted her to, but I got to get a bunch of units out of there and in Quebec. So I said, well, that's a compromise for all the bad that it does. But for me, what I was doing was I was focusing on raiding. So I was getting the leader over here, Dumas, and the Native Americans and the Rangers, the Corps de Bois, and going on raiding sprees down here in Virginia and around here. And I was racking up victory points doing that. And I was even, after a while, I had taken these units from Niagara, and I actually moved them down through the middle of the map, basically, to come down here, and I captured some stockades, getting some victory points for capturing a stockade and then burning it immediately, racking up some victory points that way. And for a while, that was really, it was like, she was getting some points for getting Louisbourg, but I was getting a bunch of points for raiding because I was doing that just as much as I could. And it was eventually, it was getting to the point where, I needed to do something to put pressure on Britain otherwise. And so I sent Montcalm down here into this region, and he ended up taking Forts William, Henry, and Edward, which are this space, Hudson, Carry North, and Hudson Carry South. I did end up getting to the point where I took these, which provided some nice victory points and put the British off balance down here a little bit for a while. But the problem was, like, me doing that sapped Montcalm's strength, combined with, I think it's the smallpox card or something, that really screwed up Montcalm's stack. She played that against me, and that kind of whittled him away. So while it was great, pushing down here, it got to the point where I was winning Pyrrhic victories. I was not getting reinforcement cards. She was getting tons of Highlanders and other reinforcements that were beefy units. And it got to the point where, like, I was able to ambush a couple times down here. Through the turns, I was getting the ambush card, which allows you, if you have more irregular units in a wilderness space than your opponent, you can ambush and basically do damage to them before they can attack back, which is very powerful. It still got to the point where it was like I could not hold this. And eventually I had to try to get some units up here to Quebec because, she left Louisbourg to get to the mouth of the St. Lawrence River and was then pushing into Quebec. So I think by the end of the game, I had to pull Montcalm back to Montreal and to kind of help. Quebec fell. My wife with the British took Quebec and then was pushing towards Montreal. She failed to push into Ohio Fork, so there's some auto victory conditions that could have come into play. But it was really all about Montreal at that point. I managed to get pulled Montcalm back into Montreal, but I basically was leaving these forts empty behind me. And so she focused on Montreal. I managed to do some maneuvering and cut the supply lines of the British army that was besieging Montreal. But just the way it ended up working out was that by the end of the game, the French won. I won the scenario because I was ahead in victory points. I think I was at, I forget what the victory point track is on here. Maybe it's not on here at the moment. I think I had 5 victory points or something like that. 4 or 5. So I won. I did win because she did not succeed in taking Montreal, but Montcalm had no forces left, and all of these forts were empty, and so all it would have taken is on the next turn, the remnant British armies down here would have swept up through Lake Champlain. She would have been able to take Montreal, and that would have been that. So if it had gone on one more turn, my 5 victory points would have been poof, gone, and very quickly, and pushed way into the British's favor. So it was really important that I raided as much as I did, and I just fought tooth and nail to hold out, and I only had to wait until the end of the 6th turn to keep all that from going on. I was able to do that. Now, what does that real victory look like in history terms? I don't know. Maybe we did enough that during the winter a different peace deal is struck where the French hold on to this but give some other concessions to the British. I don't know. But it was a lot of fun, and I knew I had a pretty good idea what the game would play out, how it would play out in terms of the game mechanics and what would be fun and what would be challenging. So it wasn't a surprise that I liked it, but I was really glad that we got to play it. And our plan is to play it some more in the future, but we're probably going to play again where she's going to be the British again, I'll be the French again, because we're still feeling out the pros and cons of either side. And then we'll probably play some more with it reversed, where I get to be the British and she gets to be the French, just to kind of see how we like playing the other side. But it was good. It was our one single playthrough so far. That was a week and a half ago or more, or maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm losing track of time. But it was definitely a good time. So, yeah, good stuff. Knocked it off my shelf of shame. It is no longer a shelf of shame game. I will have other games bubbling up to spot number 1. But very glad that we got this one at the table. Okay, so one more fun topic before we get into probably less fun topics. And if you're looking at my tabs trying to understand what what all I'm talking about today. You might be able to guess what that will be. But just want to give an update on OCS stuff. So I know we're inching closer and closer to me doing OCS stuff for the channel. I have completed a very general run-through of the 4.3 rules. I've done it before. I did a full cover-to-cover reading of the rules in the last few weeks. I will probably need to do it again before I actually get something to the table. I've got some cool stuff planned, and I'm not willing to talk about them yet until I've uploaded them, just because I don't want to get the hype up before it's real. But there are certainly some cool things ahead for OCS, and I've read through the rules, and I just want to give a few minutes commentary on this. Ultimately, the series rules are not complicated. They're not that complicated. And I know people have said that before, and it was sort of like, I've got to read it through, I've got to make sure that I get it, and do I agree? Is it really complicated or not? The actual mechanics are not terribly difficult. But I think the rub, and where things get complex, and I'm sure people will agree with this, right? Even if the rules are relatively straightforward, it's the application of the rules that is potentially the most difficult. And that really is going to come into like managing supply points and how to plan and conduct your operations to succeed in your long-term goals for the scenario that you're playing, and all that kind of stuff has to be worked out. But in general, it's not so bad. And now that I've punched and clipped a few OCS games, and I've gotten familiar with some of the units and all the rules, like I have a pretty good feel for it. And some things that stuck out, obviously, in trying to do research on the system, it's just interesting to see how much, when you look at, I guess, the sequence of play, how much of this stuff operates in a way that, I don't know, it feels against the grain, like it's not what I would have thought, where a lot of combat is happening in the movement phase rather than the combat phase. Because, and it's like I've grokked it, right? I've kind of got things figured out where I understand in the movement phase, you're doing movement, you're potentially doing some air or naval barrage, and critically, you're going to be doing overrun stuff, right? You're doing overrun combat, and I guess it's that distinction between there's mobile combat, which is the overrun, and then a prepared assault kind of combat, which is the combat you get in the combat phase. And so that fluid movement combat can be really dicey. You can really screw things up, and understanding that, like, if you're I forget what the value is called. It's that troop quality value. If your troop quality is better than your opponent's by quite a bit, then you're for sure more advantaged by doing overrun combat, because that difference in quality factors into surprise, and that factors into how good your overrun is. And the importance of the hip shoot mechanics, where and I totally agree with what others say. The words like hip shot and disorganized and a few other word choices for mechanics are a little weird and make a lot more sense in other contexts. Like maybe instead of disorganized, it's like they're disrupted. That makes more sense to me. I guess it's kind of the same. Doesn't really matter. But the hip shot thing, what it really is it allows you to do air barrage during movement or just prior to overrun combat, right? That's really how you end up using it, rather than something that happens, later and is not as effective. So you can do the standard air barrage, but if you can do it during the movement segment, which is when the hip shots occur, you basically get the bonus of whatever that air barrage is doing, disorganizing your opponent or whatever, before overrun combat. And it is representing that, I guess, enhanced, higher quality doctrine and training where you can coordinate close air support with your troops better than the standard, which is you got to do the air barrage before you ever get to the combat phase. And that difference in whatever game you're playing where you have that hip shot advantage can be very powerful because you just have that leg up on your opponent to hit them with air barrage, hit them with the overrun, where your overruns are probably even better because if your opponent is now disorganized, that impacts that troop quality level comparison. And then so too, by the time you actually get to your regular barrage and regular combat segments, you're even better shape from that standpoint. And then so on and so forth through the exploitation phase. So all of this, I think, it definitely comes together and it makes sense. The importance of having reserves and how you use those reserves either as reaction forces or exploitation forces. All of this, I mean, all the rules kind of come together, and I definitely understand and I appreciate what the game is doing from a mechanics simulation perspective. What it's trying to do, it does make sense. And I think once I get going, when I start covering games in the series, I think I'll be in good shape. It's going to take some getting used to, and I'm going to have to unlearn certain things that I would think maybe, it works this way because it works this way in other systems. I have to just make sure I stick to the way this is running. But I don't know. So that's your basic OCS update. We are probably, in terms of look ahead for the channel, we are probably looking at me finishing Pax Romana. Then we're going to go probably do Case Yellow, which is sort of an unofficial game in the Dark and Deadly series covering the invasion of France. So not OCS specifically. And then probably after that is when I'm more likely to get an OCS game to the table. So it's still going to be potentially some weeks away, maybe even months away, but I have been preparing for it. So just, I know I've pointed out to some folks that I have been getting some OCS games. It is my intention to play them. We are just going to get through a couple other things before we get to that point. So, okay, well, that's all I want to say for that. So we are 53 minutes into the video at this point. And I think that's a long time to talk about fun stuff and all goodness there. So, what I am... Sorry, I had to check something. So, here's the thing. Here's the part of the video where I say, if you've had a lot of fun and you like listening to this video, hey, thanks for sticking around for the whole hour. A lot of fun stuff that we talked about today. If you're all set and good, this is a great time to stop watching the video. The rest of the video is going to be dedicated to a topic that is not as fun. So, just to give you the fair warning, I am going to talk about current events. Current events involving the country of Afghanistan. I do so with some trepidation, and my fair warning to you is if you have had enough of headlines and talking heads and you don't care to hear about another person's thoughts on the topic of Afghanistan, now is a great time to just hop off. And I totally understand why you would do that. If you're not interested, I'd go have a great day doing other stuff. Believe me, this is less fun, but it feels timely to kind of talk through some of this stuff related to Afghanistan and even the war games that have tried to cover the conflict in Afghanistan of the last 20 years. So if that is going to bum you out or you're just not interested and you've got better things to do, by all means, head on out and do that stuff. You can close out. I appreciate you sticking around so far. I do not expect you to stick around any farther. If you want to stick around, here is some disclaimer stuff right out of the gate. I've tried to avoid talking directly about politics on the channel just because it doesn't seem like a good use of the time. And the topic of Afghanistan is uniquely positioned in that the war in Afghanistan, the conflict in Afghanistan, the United States presence in Afghanistan has spanned multiple presidential terms and administrations for both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And so in some ways, it is somewhat neutral ultimately in terms of politics. So I suspect that if you're watching this video and you're sticking around, you got your seatbelt on, you're ready to go, you and I may disagree on certain aspects of things, and I think that's okay. I don't know there's an ultimate real answer for what's going on. That's why it is so difficult and is so complex. If you're going to stick around, think of this time as an opportunity to hear someone's thoughts. If you really disagree, that's okay. Ultimately, all of this just boils down to, for me, trying to reach some level of catharsis on what's happened for the last 20 years, how wargaming has tried to come to grips with what's going on, and ways to try to reflect that, and trying to put some thoughts around the consequences of what's happened and what will happen in the future. So, again, this is not for you. You can turn away. If you watch and disagree, again, totally understand your disagreement. If you put stuff in the comments, I don't know that I will engage too much because I'm not looking for any arguments. I don't think I have the definitive answers on anything. I just want to talk through some of this stuff. If you agree, that's great, but it doesn't. Again, it's not terribly important. But this is an important time, I think, of reflection on the topic, and this, I think, is an okay place to kind of put some thoughts out there and have it be an opportunity to share thoughts and grow and consider everything that's happened. So with that, again, final warning, if you want to go, head off. If not, we're going to talk about Afghanistan. Okay, so I remember, and I'm sure most folks do, if you were alive for this, I remember where I was when the September 11 attacks happened. I remember it distinctly. I remember, I was in school. I remember getting pulled out of school to go home. I remember watching the footage of the planes crashing into the building over and over and over again, to the point where I had to go do other stuff. I told my parents I don't want to watch this anymore. I need to go do something else, because you sat there for a couple hours watching the same thing over and over again and having, the news report on what's happening over and over again. And it just was pretty wild. And I wasn't so young that it was like, oh, this event destroyed my innocence or anything like that. I wasn't that naive. But certainly that was an extreme event. It was very... something you don't forget, ingrained in your mind, and obviously had a profound effect. And of course, I'm speaking as a citizen of the United States. So my American perspective is that, right? It comes from an American perspective, and if you're not, American, you're not from the United States, or you're elsewhere, your thoughts, your experiences will be different to some degree, right? That had this change. It changed things a lot, right? Legislation was passed. We started military conflicts in countries because of this, and that event combined with what eventually became the invasion of Iraq, it set this whole tone for a number of years that was just, I know for a lot of folks who might be listening to this, you probably know what I mean, right? It's just like there was this shift in dynamic, and what people talked about and why they talked about it, and in some ways it turned a lot of things ugly and weird, and it was so strange. And I still remember, if you woke up in the morning and you turn on the TV, you could see where the news was reporting what the Department of Homeland Security or whomever it was telling us what level of scared we should be of terror threat. The color coded system. Is it a green day? Is it a blue day? Is it a yellow day? Oh, it's an orange day. We should be extra scared today because we think there might be some terrorist threat about to occur, kind of thing. That stuff happened, and it doesn't. You don't really see that now, right? It's different, but in those early 2000s, that was something that I remember it. It's just something that was part of formative years. And so, obviously when something like that happens, you sort of know there's going to be there's a punitive response. And the United States' involvement then in going into Afghanistan in an effort to disrupt the Taliban's control of the country because they supported Al-Qaeda in the attacks. From a political currency perspective, right, the American public was livid with remorse and sorrow over lives lost and wanting to get some level of vengeance. I mean, that's kind of, I use the word vengeance not lightly. I mean, that was kind of part of it, right? We're doing something about it. We're not doing nothing. We got attacked. We're going to do something about it. And that led to now nearly 20 years of a conflict, one that has been in and out of the public eye in different shapes. Again, has spanned Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, up till the current events, and I'll just say right away, I couldn't tell you what's going to happen next. I think there's some short-term stuff that we can say this is maybe what's going to occur. We don't really know what the longer-term impacts are going to be yet, and I think it's difficult to say because so many folks have gotten it wrong before, right? But I will say, for 20 years, 10 years after September 11th, Osama bin Laden was killed. You could try to look at that and say that was one sense of closure. 10 years hence, you could try to look at that. And when that happened, I was older, and it was sort of this thing. It felt like you could turn the page a little bit and say, well, we went into Afghanistan. We supported a democratic government. 10 years later, we got Osama bin Laden, killed. If that was any sense of any sense of satisfaction you got from that was probably as close as you could have imagined at the time as, again, some level of closure. What does this mean? Have we accomplished all of our goals? And now, 10 years from that event, we have what's going on currently. As I speak, as I'm talking, these are things that are going on right now. And if this is is this another page turn? Is this a closing of a book? It's hard to know. But it's certainly a significant event. A significant event happening in our time right now. This is going on where we're seeing after 20 years now, a full withdrawal from the country of Afghanistan. And it's such a tough thing to think through. And what is interesting to me, again, talking about the political nature of this whole thing, that it almost doesn't even matter what side, if you're a right-wing or a left-wing person, you might have different thoughts about whether or not staying in Afghanistan makes sense or not. Or put another way, there is a idealistic and pragmatic. There are sets of pragmatic and sets of idealistic reasons to stay or to have stayed instead of what is going on now. There are pragmatic ideas and reasons and idealistic, reasons to not stay. There's different ways, whatever kind of position you want to take could be just as valid as any other because, you know, whatever your drivers are, whatever your ideals are going to inform how you feel about this. Um, and for 20 years, it has always been difficult to say, well, what are we set on achieving? Um, and I think what was really interesting is that this game, A Distant Plane, which is a coin game, came out a while back, right? The game's been around for a while. It came out while the conflict in Afghanistan had been ongoing. So it's sort of one of those, the war game world, we get a little edgy sometimes. We venture into topics that are still happening, which means the design of that game may be okay at representing the game as a snapshot of what we know about the conflict, but is missing information that we will get in years to come. It is missing maybe, not seeing the foreshadowing of events that have yet to pass, but will pass from the time the game was created. But I think, when you look at this game design, Brian Train, who's a great guy, by the way, I have met him at a convention. He taught a game of his to my wife and I. Great guy, and I think he's got a strong analytical mind for trying to understand how to represent these conflicts. There's been a lot of weird discussion on this game because of the current events, right? You don't have to go far before you see somebody making some snarky comment about the events or talking about a distant plane, and how do you make a distant plane work to represent what's happening right now? And I think, Brian Train has pointed out that, the game was designed to reflect events up until the point it was published. That it could not account for any other events that could come after, the black swan events, the things that could not be planned for, could not be suspected to happen or could occur. It is merely a abstraction of reality up until that point. And to realize that the game, when it came out, I want to say it was 2011 or 2013 or something like that. I'm trying to remember. That was even 7-8 years ago. We have had 8 years of events happen that the game can't necessarily account for. But even if you look at it, if you were to look back at this game, right, and you looked at, there's the coalition, there's the Afghanistan government, there are warlords, there's the Taliban. And the funny thing about coin games is that, especially for coin games that are representing something that has not ended, that are still going on in some way or another, your point of selection on when to end the game or how the game should end is kind of up in the air, right? Because you're just drawing a line. You're saying the game ends here. You are at such a threshold. You win the game. But time goes on, right? And so it's like, people are on forums talking about, well, if the Taliban get a special event where they can take over, it's just not meant to cover that. And what I think is interesting is that you could compare this game in some ways to Fire in the Lake, which came out after A Distant Plane. So Fire in the Lake sort of has an advantage in that it could take elements from A Distant Plane and adapt it differently to the Vietnam War. And obviously the one difference being, well, the Vietnam War is over. had been over for a long time before this game was created, where you could model things knowing what the end state was, where this game was designed, even if you looked at the 2013 as a stopping point, the conflict was going to roll on. The event was not complete. This is showing an incomplete event, ultimately. So if you're looking at it in terms of like, well, maybe you add some cards, maybe you come out with an expansion, and maybe you do that, right? Maybe there will need to be a game designed in the future once these current events as they're happening now subside into some level of stability of this is the way it's going to be moving forward. Sort of like after the Vietnam War and the years after that, and we sort of understood, okay, well, Vietnam is now a communist country controlled by the government that was in Hanoi. As this settles out, right, that may draw the attention to, okay, someone's going to design a game about the conflict in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021. Or, if this, depending on how long this period of instability lasts into 2022, however you want to look at it. I mean, that's the thing. We don't know how this is going to go. And I think that what's very difficult is when we look at this conflict, and you look at the troop surges, right? Take it out of a game, getting back to reality and out of the game design. When you're looking at the troop surges, the continued presence over 20 years, trying to understand what was the strategic goal to achieve here. And what was it met? Well, evidently it was not, right, from an American perspective. And so was it all, what was it, was doing all of this worth something? Do the ends justify the means? And if only we would stick around longer, if we had not pulled out of Afghanistan, if we were, if we decided we were going to stay, and whatever conflict with the Taliban would be to come, is that worth the end? And, the trouble with ends justify the means mentality is that in real life, nothing truly ends. It changes. So while you could say the Vietnam War ended, there's still change. So much so that Vietnam is viewed as an ally to the United States in Southeast Asia, right? That's a factor of change. So the ends justify the means. That kind of mentality. If that you'll do whatever it takes because you believe you're going to reach some end. There's a challenge to that in that nothing's really going to end. It's just a change, and you're going to face the consequences of that change with whatever actions you implement over the course of 20 years or 5 years or 1 year or whatever. And if you looked at the conflict as it's panned out, I think what is hard to understand is when the deal was struck by the Trump administration to withdraw the remaining troops, for a lot of folks, it was like that wasn't really a big deal decision. It was like, oh, we're finally getting out of Afghanistan. There's a lot of different ways you could evaluate that. Again, if you were, it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, you could say, no, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't withdraw. You could be sitting there saying, yes, finally we're going to withdraw, we're finally done, we're going to get out of Afghanistan. And now that it's actually occurring, right, the Biden administration has adhered to that plan. And what I think has been the really unexpected thing was, okay, after 20 years, would you have expected the Afghanistan government to have operated differently in light of the Taliban seizing control of the country, which is basically what's happening right now as far as my understanding of the situation? And you think after 20 years, is that enough time for them to... Maybe you think they should have been ready, and it kind of feels like a situation where if you're like, here's if you're moving and you've got a bunch of dishes in a box and you're ready to hand the box of heavy dishes over to your buddy giving you a hand or whatever, that you hand the box over to them and they immediately throw their hands up, the box crashes onto the floor, plates are broken, and they go running out the back door. Like, I don't know that you could plan for that, and I don't. And try to think, like, is there any point in the past 20 years where this would not have happened? Like, could you go back 10 years and say, well, in 2011, if we did the same thing we're doing now, this wouldn't have happened, right? The Taliban wouldn't have taken over the country within the span of days. I don't know that you could say that. And it's very hard. I think it'd be hard to judge that, but it brings to light that question of like, well, okay, we spent 20 years trying to achieve something, and if we've not done it in 20 years, how much longer would it have taken? Knowing that we've been slowly withdrawing troops for several years now. And I don't, it's like, it's an uncomfortable question. It doesn't matter again, what part of the spectrum you are for political leanings, or if you're trying to understand or have an opinion on, does it make sense to stay? Does it make sense to leave? It if 20 years wasn't enough, you don't know how much longer it would have taken. What is the alternative? What does that look like? And I'll say I've seen some interesting takes on the situation out in the communities. People who are very upset that this has happened. That again, it's very easy to criticize any administration involved at this point. You can criticize the Bush administration for getting us involved here in the first place. You can blame Obama for not sufficiently handling the situation after he was left with it, ultimately. You can blame Trump for establishing the peace deal with the Taliban and the agreement of withdrawal that was set up in, I think it was 2020. And you can blame Biden for what's happening right now. But what's interesting is like there is never a strategic change in handling the situation, other than in some way we are gradually doing less of certain types of things. I think Brian Train pointed this out on a Board Game Geek forum thread about, okay, we're not airstriking as much, we don't have as many troops, we're sort of slowly pulling out, we're trying to hand things off to the Afghanistan government. And it's like, okay, well then what's the alternative? If that wasn't the right way to go, what is the other way to go? To go full bore the opposite direction, and is that getting you anywhere closer to where you want to be? Even hoping that there's actually a vision for what we want it to be. And with that, there was an interesting comment someone made where it was, well, we only had 2,500, 3,500 troops in the country. We could have stopped this from happening if we had just left them there a while longer. And that comment kills me in a lot of ways, because that is the same track that we've been on for 20 years. It's the same mentality of saying, well, if we're just here a little bit longer, we're just going to keep doing the same thing for a little bit longer, a little while longer. No one can define what a little while longer is. And so we just perpetuate it. We perpetuate what we're doing. We're still doing the same thing. So at some point that has to come to an end, right? You eventually say, no, we've got to go. We reach some deal. We decide that now is the time to leave. And if we didn't get what we wanted done in 20 years, are we really interested in spending 20 more? If it's going to take 20 more, if it's going to take 40 more, it's going to take 60 more years. But saying just leave them a little while longer doesn't answer anything. That doesn't provide any understanding of what that's going to do. We're just we're kicking the can down the road, and we've been doing that for so long already. It's difficult to understand that, and that's coupled with, I think, comments about people. Tough to understand commentary of like, well, we're still in Germany, we're still in South Korea, and that's true. Right? You say, well, we still have a presence. We still have, bases. We have a military presence in Germany. We have military presence in South Korea. But whenever people say that, it's like it totally divorced from the reality of the situation that Germany is not Korea, just like Korea is not Germany, and neither of those countries is Afghanistan. And that the people who live in those countries, the systems of government, the cultural sort of infrastructure and how people live and operate and see themselves are different in all of those countries. Germany was occupied as a result of World War II. America's need to be there sort of underpinned by the threat of fascism taking over the world, right? That's sort of, I realize it's a little more nuanced than that, but just, that's going to be your headline version of that, right? We needed to do that. There's a desire to contest the Soviet Union taking over Germany, so we had to get into Germany. We needed to set up West Germany. When the Cold War was over, we needed to maintain a presence in Germany as it was a unified country and was now an ally. But what you did not have in Germany and I'll just summarize in saying, like, by 1948, there was not like this insurgent movement operating within Germany against the Western powers. That is not what was going on. And you could say that some of that was driven by the Cold War and the need for factions to align together against communism. But you did not, and so you had sort of like a West Germany, East Germany thing, and everybody's fantasy war of the Third World War in Germany and everything, that whole meme. Um, but, you know, American troops being in Germany in terms of strategic use and the fact that we were not resisted in the same way that we're being resisted in other places makes being in Germany a totally different world from Afghanistan. Korea, in a similar theme, saw, Korea split between communist and democratic, capitalist, however you want to label that, divisions, with the whole North Korea versus South Korea being, one, predicated on the Korean War, the fact that there was a purpose in defending, South Korea from North Korea as part of an ally thing, but after some initial insurgency that did occur in some parts leading up to the Korean War, South Korea just operated differently. That there was that how things sort of developed out of there was different circumstances. I mean, it's easy to say things like that today because South Korea has stadiums filled with people watching guys play StarCraft 2. It's different. I don't know that we would have expected to see in Afghanistan, 40 years from now, stadiums filled with people watching StarCraft 3 being played, tournaments of StarCraft 3 being played. Who knows? Very difficult to make that judgment, but there's enough differences noted here, right? Religion's a factor, culture is a factor, geographic location is a factor in all of these things, that Afghanistan is very different from Korea, very different from Germany. And however we thought we were going to get to a place where they could become a great ally country that was highly developed and successful and all these different things that maybe you could think of as an end state, it feels like maybe that strategy was not pursued effectively. We didn't get to that point, and now we probably won't. And that sucks, right? You could think about the future and say, well, if only that Afghanistan could have taken the path of Korea, South Korea, specifically, I should say, followed that path and became something, awesome, a great ally and our good friends in the Middle East. But it is proven to be much more difficult than that. That as much as the government was supported by the United States over 20 years, there were actions taken on their part. There was continued pressure from the Taliban maintaining persistence. That meant that you could not get to that level of stability and trying to think of the right word. Maybe stability is just the right word, right? I mean, you did not have. I mean, if you think about it in terms of counterinsurgency, right? If you're looking at it, maybe you look at other coin games, right? If you're just trying to compare to other insurgency events, the government, the counterinsurgent forces in any conflict like that, when the insurgency has been snuffed out ideologically, right? If you still have people who are dedicated to a specific ideology, who are operating as insurgents, because they're stateless sometimes, right? Or you turn them from a state entity to a stateless entity, but they continue to operate on their principles, whatever they may be, until you smother out the ideology, they're always going to continue to operate. And so there was no. I mean, okay, there are Nazis alive today. There are neo-Nazis, scum of the earth. They exist, but they don't. They didn't exist in post-war Germany necessarily the same way that insurgency existed in Afghanistan, in the same way, You did not have long-term and volatile kinetic insurgency of communists in South Korea. There was some activity. I'm not going to say that there wasn't, but not on the scale in relative terms as there has been for Afghanistan. And so it's just one of those things. Like if you were trying to understand what are your real strategic goals, are the victory conditions, as a distant plane try to define them, were those valid conditions? I think in this game the coalition wants support for the government and total support plus available forces equals something something. They want support for the government and they would like to not actually be there. Right? That seems like a valid condition, right? You want that support, but you also don't want to have to be here. Is that the right way to show victory? Is that the strategic goal that should have been pursued, and did we pursue a strategy that actually enabled that to occur? A lot of fingers can be pointed, a lot of reflection on what could or could not have happened. I think what's interesting, and by point of comparison to Fire in the Lake, is like they similarly have this, victory calculation of the U.S. So, realizing the coalition is bigger than just the U.S. in terms of Afghanistan and a distant plane. Support for the government and available forces. And I'm glad at least that both of these games tried to reflect that there is some goal of not having to be there, or at least not having to be there very much, wherever the there is, right? If Vietnam is solid and safe, and the Republic of Vietnam is there, and U.S. intervention is no longer required, that's a victory. If in Afghanistan coalition forces don't really have to be there, and the government is strong, stable, and can continue to withstand pressure from the Taliban, that's a goal. That's an objective to achieve. I'm at least glad that there's some reflection of that, right? Popular support and opinion on the war in Afghanistan is a tough thing to wrangle, and ultimately is very different from Vietnam. I mean, with Vietnam, you had all the huge marches against the war specifically in part because of the draft that Vietnam had, where Afghanistan did not have a draft. There was not a draft involved. We sent the volunteer, enlisted forces of the United States armed forces to Afghanistan. There are still people upset that we were there in the first place, or that we were there as long as we were. And if you get out of here was the vengeance for 9/11, the trillions of dollars spent on foreign conflicts. If you get a globe out, right, the map's one thing. If you get a globe and you see where Afghanistan is in relation to the United States and how truly far away it is, the immense capital spent to be there, to operate, to reach some objective that apparently we could not grasp after 20 years. It's a very hard thing to try to think about. And I guess the other game to talk about war games and that have played that sort of, a little bit of an edgy approach because you're covering stuff that isn't done was Labyrinth, or is Labyrinth, the War on Terror. That gets kicked off with the invasion of Afghanistan. So I just have the blank map picture brought up from the GMT website. I don't, I get all the pieces out, and yeah, you start with an invasion of Afghanistan. And that game covered basically up through 2008, and then the expansions that came out for it basically brought it up to 2016-ish timeframe, 2017-ish, arguably maybe even 2018-ish timeframe. I forget the exact timeline they were sort of cutting for that. That continue to try to say, like, okay, what does all this really mean in relation to the War on Terror that started in 2001? Because that's really, if you're looking at a distant plane as a country specific, here's what we want to do in Afghanistan. So what's the grand strategic purpose of this, right? What are we trying to achieve by setting this up? Supporting the government in Afghanistan, having a presence there. What does that mean on the grand strategic scale? Geographically close to China, geographically close to Russia, having a strong, stable ally in the Middle East. These are all valid things to say. Okay, this is maybe a reason why we should be there. We should be doing the things that we have done there. That's an argument you could make. I don't know that I'm fully on board with that argument, but that is at least one of the arguments that exists, or a set of arguments that exist. If you were looking at the bigger picture, right, and that's what Labyrinth attempts to simulate or portray, if it's not a simulation, because it's a card-driven game with wooden bits, and it's just a game. It's just a game, and it's not real life. Afghanistan is one country amongst many that have some relation to the war on terror or has terrorism. And if we were to try to look at it that way, so we did not succeed, and we are pulled out. We pull out of Afghanistan. We're done in Afghanistan. I hope, I should have said this right away, and my apologies. I intended to, and I got underway too. I hope that everyone who's trying to get out of Afghanistan gets to where they need to be safely. And that goes for the people who, if Afghanistan is their home country, if they want to live in a country with democratic principles and freedom, self-determination, all of that, at this point it seems like they're not going to be able to get that in Afghanistan. And that is sad, and it is unfortunate, and there's going to be tragedies now and into the future that will occur. I hope those people are able to get somewhere that shares their principles. And there will be refugee crises that will occur, that will be talked about, that will be fought over politically. But as these things are going on right now, they're happening right now. This is a real life thing. This is not a historical event. This is real pain. This is real suffering that is happening. But those people get to a safe place. The big scale strategic considerations become what happens next, right? If the Taliban are going to take control of Afghanistan again, what does that mean? I think it is hard to project. I already know there's folks saying this is going to lead to another 9/11. I don't know that that's true. I think that is a hard thing to guess at, because the events of September 11th are so specifically unique to the circumstances that occurred. Supposedly, with the Patriot Act, various security measures, we are supposed to be safe. We have mitigations. If you're looking at this from a risk management perspective, we have mitigations in place, right? If the Taliban being in control of a country in particular means something, if we think that enables greater amounts of terrorism, that may force different decisions now into the future. I can't even guess at what that might mean. Difficult to forecast. I don't think that it necessarily means there is now an existential threat to the United States. And when I say existential threat, meaning like the actions of the Taliban in Afghanistan or any groups that the Taliban may provide support to, I do not think are capable of destroying the nation, the country, the government of the United States of America. But that anything that could is really a threat that is domestic rather than foreign. I think it is more likely a domestic threat is capable of doing something of that degree of catastrophe, and that those domestic factors could have foreign influence, but that I do not think that's necessarily concerned, but it probably will have an effect on the broader region, whether we're talking about Iran, India, the Gulf states, as they're summarized here in the Labyrinth game. Um, all of that, this will have a shift. This is going to have an effect. And I can only imagine what the next Labyrinth expansion is going to be about. I mean, this is going to be one of those things, right? How long can Labyrinth: The War on Terror be a, in any way, a serious attempt at portraying the global war on terror? Because I do think when we looked at September 11th as a dynamic point in time, like that was a catalyst for change. It triggered that. There was the Cold War. The Cold War ended. There was this 10 years of relative optimism, and then the shadow of the war on terror being sprung up from the attacks on September 11th. Since then, I mean, a lot has happened, right? I mean, the various conflicts have occurred. And the Labyrinth game and its expansions have tried to portray some of that. But even the last expansion, it was interesting because it's like you sort of run out of new war on terror things to cover. So much so that, like, the last expansion for Labyrinth ended up having a lot of cards that had to do with U.S. domestic issues that had nothing to do with the war on terror. Completely pointless in terms of the war on terror. That's the one big, like, the last expansion just didn't do. I mean, it had. Don't get me wrong. It covers events that are happening that are related to the war on terror, but there's a decent chunk of cards that just have nothing to do with it. Because so much, like, in some ways, it's at what point does the war on terror become less significant in the culture and the mindset of people? And that, I'm sure, it's uneven, right? There are folks, I know folks in the United States that have not had to think about Afghanistan in a very long time until the last few weeks. That the conflict there does not impact their daily lives. It doesn't mean a whole lot. There have not been many significant terrorist attacks driven by Islamic radicalism, jihadism, whatever you want to refer to it as, in the United States in a while. It kind of does feel like the war on terror as it was defined in 2001 time frame feels different in many ways now. And maybe that just, it's going to change. It's going to change again, right? There is no end. The ends justify the means. Is just the means justify the change that's occurring. There will be change, but it does make me wonder, what is the next phase? If it was the Cold War and then the war on terror, what if we're at the point where we're seeing another shift? What is that shift? What does that look like? Is it a comparison between, is it a political spectrum division? Is it left versus right across the globe? Is it, is it something else entirely? Is it a new conflict based around cyber warfare? I mean, there's so many things. And I think it's like with Labyrinth, it's stretching a 20-year-old concept into a different epoch almost, it feels. And maybe this event in Afghanistan is the bookend for that process. It'd be interesting to try to, really look at, this map that was created in, 2008? And try to figure out, are we reaching something of a victory? If you're looking at it from an American perspective, right? Are we any closer than we thought we were 20 years ago? I guess I don't have answers for it, but stuff that I can't help but think about. This has been on my mind so much, obviously, seeing in the news and things happening, and hoping people are safe and get home or get out of a dangerous situation. Thinking about that and thinking about how all of these events for 20 years has kind of led up to this moment. I don't know. this has been this event. I mean, I know for folks that are older, right, this has been around for a while. This has been the majority of my life. This has been going on. Not all of it, mind you. Again, I wasn't a small child when this all started or anything, but it has been more than half my life. Um, and it's something that's it's just been a part of, the public consciousness, the world events, the world news. You are familiar with these things going on, and seeing yet again another seismic shift in what the status quo is significant and worth thinking about. And what that means for war games, too. Like I said before, I mean, Labyrinth is one way to look at it. A Distant Plain is another. But in the years to come, depending on stability, how much change occurs, it would probably be worth re-examining. Like any conflict, there are Vietnam War games that have to now, if they're being reprinted, have to make a decision. Are they going to incorporate new information that we have today that we didn't have 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago about the Vietnam War? The same thing's going to happen here. There are going to be things that we will understand better 10 years from now about the conflict in Afghanistan that the people designing games don't necessarily know right now. It'll be interesting to see how we look at the events of today several years down the road. How did we choose to reflect this conflict simulation? What did we think was important versus what we thought about it as it was happening, or as it was beginning, right? Distant Plain or a Labyrinth, or Labyrinth, games designed as these events were happening. If these events are ending, or they've reached some logical, that word ending's the tricky part, right? I keep saying it's the change. If we change and these models become less relevant, how do we create a conflict simulation after the fact? And what's different, right? Compare, it'll be interesting to compare A Distant Plain in Labyrinth with the games to come, if there are games that are designed to simulate this conflict. And I guess that's as much as I'm willing to say on the subject now. I realize I've been talking about this for almost 45 minutes or more. I think more than 45 minutes. Again, you probably have your own thoughts on all of this. You may look at this. I don't know. Have I said anything very specifically objectionable? I don't know. If you disagree, you probably have very good reasons to disagree with me. And again, it's so hard. You can try to say, oh, all this has gone bad because of X, Y, Z, and now ABC is going to happen. I think that's all very hard to judge right now. I think so much is unknown, and it is hard to forecast. You can have a short-term view of maybe what's going to happen in the months, maybe the first couple of years ahead, but everything changes. There will be something else that occurs that drives events. So, I don't know. Like I said, if you guys have comments on this set of topics specifically, I don't know how engaged I'll be in the comments section. I'm not looking for a fight, not looking for a huge discussion, because I think any particular point that anyone wants to make, I've probably already talked to in here, right? I don't think Afghanistan is like Germany. I don't think Afghanistan is like South Korea. I think Afghanistan is Afghanistan, and it has its own challenges. And if those challenges were not met, if those nuances were not properly addressed, that would be maybe why we're seeing the situation that we're seeing. And a coulda, woulda, shoulda kind of thing we can talk about, but I don't know. It's tough. So, okay, guys. Well, that's as much as I can say on it, or that I guess I'm willing to, before I talk myself to a dry throat and a tired mind. Maybe this rambling about the subject is useful to you. Maybe it's not. If you just felt like you wasted 45 minutes of your time, I'm sorry. For folks that, had formative years around the invasion of Afghanistan, 9/11, all this, the events of today just have a special effect on the mind, I think. For me, anyway. It's hard to escape thinking about Afghanistan. My thoughts drift back to it constantly, and thinking, trying to absorb the history of what's happened in the last 20 years and to make sense of everything. It is a hard thing to think about, but one that I can't help but think about. The bizarre thing being, I know folks have said it before, you could have had someone serve in the United States Armed Forces going into Afghanistan in 2001, have that same person have a child who could be stationed in Afghanistan now in what is essentially the same conflict that their parent served in. And that's weird. It's not super often that kind of thing can happen in United States context anyway. How many conflicts have we had where it's that many years of a constant struggle? There's few, and we've made a lot of those comparisons already in this video. So, yeah. So hope you're not too bothered. I know it's a bummer topic. If this conflict has personally affected you, my condolences, my thoughts to you, my friend. Again, if you greatly disagree, understand. If you agree, well, not much to say. We'll see what the future brings, and I hope that at least there's some opportunity to take some better paths in the future, whatever that looks like, that we learn from what has happened, we learn from history, we understand the history, we understand what happened, and have that inform our choices for the future. That is the only maybe good thing you can see here, is we have that opportunity to do better, whatever reality throws at us here into the future. Thanks for watching, guys. If you stuck around this long, kudos to you. Next month we'll do another monitor side chat. Hopefully we'll be a little bit brighter. We'll see. Like I said, we covered good stuff. We hit some bad stuff here. We'll be continuing the Pax Romana playthrough series, and then, like I said, get to Case Yellow and probably OCS stuff in the future. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you guys soon. See ya.